Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the last session in our initial training series for R3 Cohort 3. Today, we're going to talk about the PPR and creating a performance plan. Jamie Lee, could you advance the next slide, please? Thank you. So as usual, everyone is muted. We want you to use the chat box in the lower right-hand corner for any comments or questions, and we will stop periodically to tee those up for our presenter today. Next slide. As you heard, we are being recorded, so afterward I'm going to send everyone the recording as well as the PDF of the PowerPoint and an email with a couple of the key points from today's session. And it's not going to come from my email box, it's going to come from cja.r3training@illinois.gov. We are still collecting other names for the contact list. So if you would email the cja.r3training mailbox to add additional folks to the training list, that's please give me their name, their role on the grant, and their email, and we'll add them to the list because, as you'll see on the next slide, we are envisioning that there will be additional trainings coming where we may do quarterly trainings or at least check-ins with our grantees, talk about other topics along the way. So if you do have any other folks that you would like to receive those invitations to ongoing R3 Cohort 3 trainings, then please use the cja.r3training@illinois.gov mailbox to send me that information. So I'm going to hand it over to Jamie Lee, who is one of our partners in the Research and Analysis Unit at the Authority, and she's going to take you through today's session. Jamie Lee?
Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here representing Research and Analysis and talking to everyone today about creating performance plans and just kind of how we can set you all up for success to approach the PPRs. So really the point of this presentation today is kind of to show you how to create these performance plans, to go over goals, objectives, and measures, development, and then go through some examples. And really we want to kind of go through all of this because we want to set you up for success from the beginning for these PPRs. And so this is really going to kind of help you understand how to collect data so it's not as onerous for you all to collect and enter that. And you might see as we're going through it, right, that the PPR does reflect your data that you submitted in the NOFO, but that can be adjusted if it makes sense for you all to adjust it going forward. And we did have those standard measures. We'll send those back out in an Excel form for the PPRs. And then we also want to understand what unique measures that you all are collecting that we may not have on that broad list. So we'll just kind of jump in at this point. So what is a performance plan, right? It consists of your goals, objectives, and measures. And when we think about your goals, objectives, and measures, we really want these things to be realistic and we want these things to be measurable, right? So you can kind of think about what services are you all providing and what impacts can those services have. And so when we think about these being kind of realistic and measurable, right, the broad goal might be to decrease violence in the community, but that's too big of an outcome for us to be measuring at this point. Right. So we might want to say, instead of decrease violence in the community, we want to decrease victimization rates in the folks that you all are serving, or we want to decrease recidivism rates in the folks that you are serving. So that's kind of something thinking about, how realistic is this goal for you all to, accomplish over your grant period. Another kind of example of this would be increase youth self-esteem, right? You might be working to do that. And that could be a realistic goal, but you need to make sure that you have a way to measure that, right? If there isn't a way to measure youth self-esteem when they're coming in and when they're exiting your program after they've received your services, then it's not really a good goal for you all to be trying to measure. The performance plan also allows you to lay out the milestones that you hope to achieve over your entire grant period. And then it influences what you all are going to be able to be tracking throughout the grant cycle. And so when we are talking about why goal objectives and measures are important, there's a couple reasons. One, it's to strengthen your program, right? We want you all to be able to set goals, and we want you all to be able to track your program performance. And so kind of by tracking your program performance, you're able to highlight where you all have been successful, and you're also able to make notes of areas that might need improvement going forward, right? Maybe there are some goals that you haven't met, maybe there are some objectives you haven't met, and that's completely fine. But that way you all are able to say, okay, these are the areas that we've done really well on. These are the areas where we had some barriers. These are kind of the barriers that we've encountered, why we haven't been able to meet that goal. It's totally fine to not meet these goals, but we do want you to set them out in the beginning, so that way we really know kind of what you're working towards. The other piece of this is really to help you all to strengthen future grant proposals, right? We think that you all are doing some amazing work. That's why you've been funded through this program. And so we want this work to be sustainable. We want it to be funded in the future. And so if you're able to collect data, to report that data, to track it over time, you can really show, right, one, that you've thought about your important program aspects, that you kind of have thought through, this is the activities that our program engages in, this is what we think the program or services are going to actually do. And then the other piece of that is really showing your impact. And so, right, we're requesting the data. So the data is for us because we're requesting it, but it's also for you all because we do want you to be able to show your impact, and that will help you all to get funding in the future. So at this point, we're going to go through program goals, objectives, and measures. And so we'll just start with the program goals. And so program goals are really broad, general statements of purpose. They're going to state those long-term or your bigger picture results that you're looking to achieve through your program. And so to define your goal, you really want to think about what change you want to see by implementing your services. And so really think about that kind of broadly to understand, right? We don't want them to be too broad. We don't want them to say, you know, decrease violence in the community, because you're not going to reach every single community member, but decreasing victimization, decreasing recidivism within the specific population that you're serving, that would be a good goal kind of over time. So goals should directly relate to your activities. And so for the purpose of this grant, we do want to avoid the goals that are really wide scale community level change, like I just mentioned. So again, not decrease violence in the community, but maybe decrease recidivism within program participants. And so even if kind of you're thinking about these goals and they do become too broad, you're going to have a hard time measuring them and showing that impact. And so even if kind of your program positively impacts participants, violence could still be committed by people who aren't in your program, or it could be caused by other factors that aren't being addressed by your program. And so that's why we do want to make these goals, you know, manageable and realistic, just to make sure that you're able to actually measure the things that you all are doing and be able to show that impact effectively. So let's think about which is the goal here, right? We have two kind of potential goals up on the screen. So the first one is preparing youth for a productive and positive future by connecting program participants to education and employment. And then B is connecting 50 youth participants with tutors. And so the goal here is going to be A, because tutoring is not the goal, but it's your way to achieve the goal, right? You want to kind of broadly prepare youth for that productive and positive future, and you want to do that by connecting them to education and employment. And so connecting 50 youth participants with tutors, that will kind of come up later as something that you'll be able to measure, but the goal should be a little bit broader than that. So at this point, we're going to jump into the objectives. And the objectives really are building blocks or steps that you're working on towards achieving that goal. And program objectives are really broken down into two categories. So we have output objectives and outcome objectives. When we're thinking about program objectives, we really want them to be, you know, following this kind of SMART model, right? So we want them to be specific, we want them to be measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so what that really means, specific is going to be clearly stated, right? So really anyone who is reading what these goals or objectives are, they can really easily understand it. They know what's going to be done, and they're going to understand who is specifically going to do that. In terms of measurable, we're thinking about a predetermined way to measure this objective, right? So you might have a count, you might have a measure that you're giving out to your clients to have them fill out at the beginning of services or at the end of services or just at the end of services, but having thought through exactly how you're going to be measuring that before you kind of start doing the work. The next piece of this is achievable. And so again, we really want this to be realistic given the realities that you all are facing in your communities and facing in your organizations. Relevant just means that it makes sense and that it's going to fit both the purpose of the grant and the purpose of your program, right? So we don't necessarily want you to stretch to kind of achieve objectives that are a little bit beyond what you think you all are able to do. We want them to keep, relevant and within the actual services and activities that you all are offering. And then the final piece of this is time bound. And that just means that we have a specific timeline for completion. And the kind of nice thing about this grant, right, is that there are a specific timeline that you all follow. And so you already are kind of time bound just based on when the grant is occurring. So we really do, as we're developing program objectives, we do want to think through this SMART model and just kind of make sure that the objectives are meeting each of these different letters. And so kind of talk about the output and the outcome objectives. And so the output objectives are really short-term activities that need to be completed in order to achieve your objectives and goals. And these really are contingent upon your program's design and your program's theory. And so these are really the reasons why your program is going to achieve its goals after you implement all of your various activities. So we'll just kind of get into an example to kind of show what this looks like in practice. And so again, if your goal is preparing youth for a productive and positive future by connecting program participants to education and employment, some of your output objectives could be program youth are experiencing difficulties with schoolwork, they're going to be matched with tutors. And then program youth who are participating, they're going to learn about options that are available after high school, right? So you're able to kind of connect them to education, you're helping them to do better in their education by connecting them with tutors, and then you're kind of showing them about the options available after high school, so that will connect them either to further education or to employment after they've graduated. And so remember, kind of back to that SMART model, right? We want it to be specific so anyone can kind of understand that, right? So if you're looking at these objectives, you can see you're going to match youth with tutors and you're going to tell them about options available after high school. Measurable, we can kind of look at how many youth we're doing for both of these things, how many are being matched with tutors and how many are kind of going to different events to learn about options after high school. Achievable, right? These are things, if this is what your program is focused on, then kind of getting tutors to help match students, and then maybe taking them to college visits, taking them to job fairs. Those are things that would be achievable. Relevant, again, if this is your goal to connect them with education and employment, these would be some objectives that would be relevant to that. And then time bound, these are things that we would like to complete before the grant cycle is over. The outcome objectives, these are a little bit higher level, right? So they're going to be kind of mid-level results directly related to the completion of your process objectives. And so outcome objectives are similar to goals, but they're generally kind of smaller scale and they're a little bit less ambitious. And so again, we're using this kind of goal of connecting program participants to education and employment. And so your outcome objectives might be program youth that receive tutoring, they're going to increase their math and reading levels, right? So when you're kind of thinking about the output, we're just talking about matching them up with tutors. Then the outcome of matching them up with tutors would be, we want to increase their math and reading levels. And then the second kind of outcome objective that might come out of this would be students will either enter the workforce after completing high school, or they're going to continue their education. And so again, kind of following that SMART model, it's specific, we're clearly stating what we want to have done. It's going to be measurable, right? We can kind of look at math and reading levels of students coming in, then we can look at math and reading levels of students coming out. Then we can also count the number of students who entered the workforce or the number of students who continued their education. Achievable given the framework of your program, if this is kind of your goal, all of these things kind of flow to make sense. Relevant, again, we just want them all to flow and make sense and be something that you're able to do. And then time bound within the specific grant cycle. And so at this point, we are going to move into the performance measures to kind of talk about what those are and how they differ from the goals and objectives. And so performance measures really are quantities that are going to determine whether or not you're achieving those objectives and goals. And so we really do want you to specify the amount or the scope of your expected performance. So these can be things like counts, they can be things like percentages, right? But we do want a specific number that's attached to that. And so you might want to say, we want this number of youth, this number of clients to do X, Y, or Z, or of the 100 people that we serve, we want 25% of them to be able to achieve X, Y, and Z, right? And so we really do want to be able to specify the amount or the scope of that performance. And we also want you all to kind of be mindful of the ways that measures can help your organization to improve outcomes, to be able to share your lessons learned with other stakeholders, and really be able to then think about how you can spread promising practices, right? So if you all are doing something really well, we want the community to know that. We want this to kind of be able to spread in the ways that it can. So that way we're able to serve communities just more broadly better. Um, and so as you're thinking about these performance measures, we really want you all to be thinking about what's going to be helpful to know and what's going to be interesting for you all to know. Ideally, we don't want there to be more than 3 or 4 performance measures per objective, right? We can maybe think of a list of 20 things that we can maybe throw at the wall and hoping that some of these things are going to happen. But we really do want you to think about which ones are going to be the most important, which ones are the most interesting, which ones really flow nicely with your goals and objectives. And so really nail it down and kind of solidify based on those 3 or 4. And so really choose the ones that are the strongest indicators of your performance. You can think about data that already exists. You can think about your kind of capacity to collect data at currently, right? You probably don't have capacity to collect 20 different performance measures. And that's fine, because if we can just think of 3 or 4 that are really relevant to your program, to your services, that's really going to be better at showing your impact, because those are going to be the strongest indicators. And so as you are kind of developing these performance measures, this is kind of a checklist that you can go through to really think about whether or not it makes sense to include those performance measures. So is it logical and directly related to your goals and objectives? Are the performance measures easy to understand, right? If anyone was kind of reading it, would it make sense to them as they were reading it? Is this something that you can monitor regularly, right? If you're not able to collect these data, if you're not able to really kind of look back and see whether or not this is happening, then it's probably not going to be a good performance measure for you. Is the data necessary for measurement readily available, right? Are you already collecting it? Is it something that you'll be able to kind of easily establish? That way you can collect these data going forward to be able to track whether or not you're meeting these performance measures. Also thinking about whether it can be measured against a specific base or benchmark, right? So if you're thinking about lowering rates of recidivism, are you able to get the average rate of recidivism either for the state of Illinois, for your community, something like that, to see, okay, this is what the average rate of recidivism is, then we're going to look at recidivism within our specific program to see how those things compare to each other. So kind of think about benchmarks like that, or just think about, right now we are tutoring 0 youth, and we want to be able to tutor maybe 20 of them, right? So you do have kind of a benchmark of where you would like to go based on what your program is. Then thinking about, making sure that it is quantified and that it is measurable. So making sure that you can get some kind of number to be able to report. So again, whether that's just the raw number, specific amount, whether that's a percentage, whether it's, a reading rate, grade level math, those kinds of things, just making sure that there is some kind of way to measure it and that you can quantify it. And then thinking about whether or not you can describe your specific performance targets. And so let's look at kind of what an example of these performance measures would be. So again, we're using the goal of preparing youth for a productive and positive future by connecting them to education and employment. And so if we're thinking about that process objective of youth who are experiencing difficulties in school, that we're going to match them with tutors. The performance measures for that goal and for that process objective might be the program is going to obtain 5 tutors, and the program is going to match 20 youth with tutors, right? So this way we can say we know exactly how many tutors we're going to get, and we know how many youth we want to match with tutors. And again, I do want to say, right, if these are your goals and you don't end up meeting them, that's totally fine, right? Maybe you are only able to hire 3 or 4 tutors. Maybe those are the ones who are qualified, those are the ones who apply for the job, and maybe you still are able to get 20 youth, matched with the tutors. Or maybe you aren't able to get 20 youth, right? Maybe if you can only hire 4 tutors, you can only get 16 youth matched. And it's totally fine. There isn't any kind of punitive response based on whether or not you all meet these performance measures, but we do want you thinking about them in advance so that way there is something to kind of work towards and you can really show your impact. And so again, as you're developing these performance measures, we really do want you to kind of think about that checklist, right? So is it logical and directly related to the goals, right? So we want youth to be connected to education and employment. This one would specifically relate to education. So if they're experiencing difficulty in schoolwork, we're going to match them with tutors. And kind of logically, the next step would be to get some of these tutors and then to match the youth with them. We want it to be easy to understand, right? We want to be able to monitor it regularly so we can count the number of tutors that the program has hired. We can count the number of youth who have been actually matched with the tutors. We also want a way to be able to track that, right? So you may have hiring processes. By having your hiring processes, you can kind of count how many tutors that you've been able to hire and then figure out a way to be able to track the number of youth who are being served by these tutors. And then just making sure that we're able to describe it, right? So we're able to describe how many tutors we've hired and how many youth have actually been matched with them. So if we think about kind of the other part of this, right, of preparing youth for a productive and positive future by connecting them with education and employment, we also might think about that outcome objective of youth learning about the options available after high school. And so if that's kind of what our objective is, some of the performance measures related to this might be, we want 30 youth to attend job fairs, we want 30 youth to attend college visits, right? These are kind of things that we're going to set up. We're going to count how many youth are doing each of these things and then be able to track it. And then based on that, right, if we have 30 youth who are attending job fairs, maybe we want 10 of them at least to be able to secure employment based on these job fairs. And maybe we want 20 of the youth to be able to apply to continuing education opportunities, right? And these could be the same 30 youth who are attending the job fairs and attending the college visits, or it could be 60 youth total, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be unique and they don't necessarily need to duplicate each other, but this is just kind of the goal that's being set out. And so again, kind of following that checklist to make sure that it's logical, that it's directly related, that it's easily understandable. It can be monitored regularly, it's quantifiable, so we can count the 30 youth, we can count the 10 youth, the 20 youth, and that we are specifically describing it. So at this point, I do just want to quickly kind of pause and ask if there are questions about creating the goals, creating the objectives, creating the measures, and kind of what the differences are between them, or any other general questions that you all have at this point.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but this would be a good time for folks to drop in any questions that they have, and we'll read them off and let Jamie Lee answer them for us. Nothing yet. Do you want to move on?
Yep, yeah, and if you do have any questions, we could always answer them later too.
Yep.
So the next part of this is just kind of thinking about how you all are going to create those goals, objectives, and measures, and just kind of how you'll detail them. And so one way to do this might be helpful to start by developing a table, right? So here's kind of an example in this slide of what the table looks like. This is just an example of youth development programs, right? So it goes through kind of the goal of the program, the process objectives, those performance measures related to process objectives, the outcome objectives, and then the performance measures related to those. And so you can kind of see for these performance measures, right, we have some of them are numbers, some of them are percentages, but they are easily quantifiable. So that way we're able to see kind of how you all are meeting these goals, these measures over time. And so you can use the performance metrics template that you submitted with your NOFO to design this, right? You've already proposed some program activities, you've proposed the outputs, you've proposed the goals for the outputs, you've proposed your outcomes and outcome goals, and you've also proposed some of these performance measures or metrics. And so you can use and update this information when you're designing your performance plan, right? You might want to go back and look back at that and see, okay, do these things still make sense for us? Do they need to be adjusted in any way? Do we need to think about how we might measure them better? If they're things, right, like raising youth self-esteem, think about exactly how you're going to measure that with youth coming in and youth leaving the services. And I do just kind of want to reiterate, right, that the goals, objectives, and measures aren't something that you all are held to in relation to funding, right? If these things aren't accomplished in the way that you all envision, that's totally fine and it's not going to be tied to your funding. This is just an information gathering process, right? It's not supposed to be punitive. And we really do want to understand how things are going based on your goals, objectives, and measures. And we want you all to be able to track this, to be able to really show the successes of your program, because we do think that you all are doing fantastic work. And so by tracking this, you can really show the work that you all are doing, the impact that you've made in your community, and ideally be able to use that information to get additional funding. And so when we're kind of collecting all of these data, we don't report your data publicly on an individual organizational level, right? We're not saying organization X served this many clients and this is the impact that they have. We look at what all of the organizations related to R3 are doing, kind of combined together to say, okay, this is the impact that the program is making in Illinois. And so we really do want to look at the broad trends just to see what the impact is as a cohort. And this really does help make sure that R3 continues to get funding and that we can just show what the broader impact of the program is. And so it's positive for R3 because we can show that great impact that the program is making as a whole. And then it's also good for you all because you all can show to your other stakeholders what impact you all are making, and then ideally be able to use that not only to track what you all are doing well, where you can maybe improve, but also then to be able to use this information to get funding in the future. And so another option to really be able to kind of, show your goals, objectives, and measures would be to design a logic model. And a logic model really just helps to connect your program's resources, your activities, outputs, outcomes, and your overall goals. And so while you kind of think about a logic model, right, it has kind of a fancy name, but you really don't need an advanced degree to be able to put this together. It's really for you to just understand how your activities are mapping onto the outputs, how those are mapping onto outcomes, and really be able to see the connectedness and the flow of everything. So if you look kind of at the slide, the example here, the inputs are really everything that's going into your services, right? You can think about funding, the funding that you have through R3, the funding that you have through other organizations potentially, your program staff. These are part of your inputs, right? They're helping to make sure that you're getting the job done and that you're actually able to implement the things that you're trying to do. If you all have any kinds of partnerships, right? If there are collaboratives happening, that would be part of it. Going back to kind of the example that we provided before, if you have partnerships with higher education institutions, that's how you're able to do the college visits. If you have partnerships with employers in the community, that's how you're able to do the job fairs, right? That's going to be important to really kind of think about too. Another piece of this is just the facilities, right? Wherever you all are located, that's going to be an important piece. If you're doing, job fairs or college visits, those kind of facilities are also going to be important for you to kind of think about, just to understand more broadly what resources you all have available for you. And then the other piece of this is really thinking about who you have as your evaluation specialist, right? Do you have folks who are able to collect your data? Do you have folks who are able to analyze your data? And this can be at a really, it doesn't need to be at a very high level. It can just be, an Excel sheet that you all are tracking how many youth you're serving, how many clients you're serving, depending on kind of what your program is. It can be, monitoring a hotline to see how many calls you're getting in, and then how many of those calls you're able to give advice to, those kinds of things. And so really thinking about how you're collecting data, who's doing that, is really going to be important to understand those inputs or resources. The next part of this logic model is really just your activities. So thinking about how you're training your staff, thinking about how you are recruiting all of your participants who are going to participate in your program, and then think specifically about what services exactly you are providing. These are just going to be what your activities are. Your outputs, these are going to be things that are going to be quantifiable, right? So kind of going along the lines of those activities, how many staff were trained? How many participants were recruited? How many of those participants were then served? How many workshops have you had? And then maybe think about how many hours all of the workshops are together. So really putting all of those various things together. And then the outcomes are really, again, kind of what you're expecting to change, what you're expecting to improve based on those activities, based on those outputs. And so you're going to do all of these things. You want to see these numbers increase. And based on that, you expect to find something, right? And then these impacts are just a synonym for goals, right? And so the impacts, you really do want to think about that kind of broader goals and put those in here. And so if you all are interested in designing a logic model, we have put together some different resources for you all. So you can use the slide and kind of go and look at the various different resources that we have on there. It will kind of tell you more about what a logic model is, how you can create one, and then just the various different kind of differences between each of these categories as you all are designing them. So that way you can kind of put things in place and make sure that they are connected and that they flow nicely. And so at this point, we just kind of want to talk about what the key takeaways are, right? So thinking about that SMART model for your objectives, thinking about the checklist for your performance measures, and then kind of thinking about either creating that table or designing a logic model. So that way you are able to connect your resources, connect your activities, outputs, outcomes, and goals. And so at this point, I will open it up for any questions related to any of the things that I've talked about today.
We don't have any questions in the chat, but if I could add something, you're right that it's not like we're going to take funding away. We're going to close down a grant if our grantees aren't meeting all of the objectives that they've set, all of those benchmarks that we're going to have in the agreement. But we do encourage you to use the narrative portion of the PPR to tell us to give us some understanding if you are falling short of your benchmarks, if there's something that is some speed bump has come up in the implementation of your program, so we can understand what's going on when we look at those numbers, because we actually do look at those numbers, because we see ourselves as partners in your grant. And if you're running into some obstacles, we want to have a discussion with you and talk about ways that we may be able to navigate around those speed bumps or get a better understanding about what's really happening in the community. So let's see. So we just have a comment that one of our grantees appreciates, Jamie Lee, you spelling out the differences between outcomes, objectives, and performance measures, and that sometimes the terms are kind of used interchangeably. So they appreciate the clarity. Thank you very much. That's the only comment I see, and I don't see any questions.
So if people are still thinking of questions too, what I can do right now is just kind of jump into what the PPR is going to look like. So that way I can kind of show you a little bit more in depth, and you all will get the PPR. It will be sent via email to you all when kind of all of these things are set up. Let me just pull that up really quick. If I can find where it is. Here we go.
While you're doing that, there is one question that came up in the chat, Jamie Lee.
Yep.
One of the grantees asked, since we've already filled out these forms, if things change, do we need to redo them and resubmit? We're going to, while you were going through the execution process, we're kind of looking at the goals, objectives, and performance measures that you submitted in your application. And there may be some refinement to them now to make them realistic, to make sure that we've set benchmarks, we've set something that's quantifiable. But once you have an executed agreement, those are the benchmarks that we're going to go by. So if you find that there is some major change in the goals, objectives, and performance measures, because that's what we're going to build the PPR on, we would have to amend the agreement. So that's why we spend a lot of time during the execution phase of really strengthening those goals, objectives, and performance measures so that we can get you off on a good footing and not be amending your agreement, which is a time-consuming process, by the way. Not amending your agreement constantly. So we want to have a good start with the signed agreement, and then keep us informed using that narrative, talking to your grant specialist about your performance. And if there is a real significant change, then we would have to amend your agreement. That's the last one.
Perfect. So this is what the PPR is going to look like when you all receive it. And so it really just is kind of this Excel page. And I'll kind of go through, excuse me, what exactly you all will be entering, right? So the beginning of this is really just going to be kind of information verification, right? So what is your grant ID? What's your organization name? We're doing this for the service delivery program. So these will all be service delivery. What funding region are you in? Are you part of a collaboration, or are you just a single organization that's working on the grant? And then we want to know who is the person who's completing this report and what is their email. The next part is just thinking about staff, right? So we want to know how many staff did you have at the start of the quarter? How many paid staff did you have at the end of the quarter? Did any of these folks voluntarily leave during this period? Did any of them involuntarily leave during the period? And did you hire anyone during the period, right? And so the reporting periods will be up here. And so you'll look every quarter and kind of enter those numbers. If you are a collaborative organization, then you're going to receive some extra questions, right? Because you're doing a little bit of extra work. And so with these kind of collaborative questions, we want to know how many subrecipient sites have been funded. What are the names and the addresses of those sites? What's kind of the description of the pass-through plan for monitoring these subrecipients, right? Are you having them submit data? Are you doing site visits? What exactly are you kind of doing to be able to monitor that? And then how many subrecipient sites are actually being, kind of included in this, right? And so it might be 3 subrecipient sites are funded, but one of these sites has 2 sites themselves, right? And so that's going to be 4 instead of 3. So we can kind of understand that. And with this, you won't just get this Excel template, you'll also get a data dictionary. So if any of these things don't make sense, you can always go to the data dictionary and look up what they are. You don't need to remember everything that I say today. This is just kind of an example to take you through what this looks like and exactly what you'll be entering. But no need to remember or take, a lot of notes, because you will get a data dictionary that lists all of these things and what they mean. On the second part, for collaborative organizations, you're just going to kind of list how many data reports you've received, how many fiscal reports you've received and reviewed. Have you done site visits? How many of those? How many of those have you reported to ICJIA? How many of those have you reported within 7 days of the site visit? How many are requiring technical assistance, who received that technical assistance? And then how many are requiring fiscal assistance and have received that fiscal assistance? The next part for collaboratives are just thinking about the percentage of subrecipients that submitted their quarterly data reports on time, their periodic fiscal reports on time, and then their quarterly fiscal reports on time. And so, if you have 5 and 4 of them have done this, then it'll be 80% for all of these, or maybe you have 100% that are doing these things, but just we want to know the percentage of folks that are submitting these things on time. The last part for the collaboratives will be thinking about how many subrecipient sites were identified as needing corrective action, how many were then notified of that and provided with a plan of corrective action, right? These are all if applicable, and so if they're not applicable, you don't need to fill these out. And then the number of subrecipients who actually completed that corrective action plan within the time frame if you specified one. The next part will just be how many scheduled subrecipient site visits do you have, and then what is the schedule for that, right? So maybe we're going to visit site 1 and 2 in January and February. We're going to visit site 3 and 4 in March and April. Then we'll redo those in August and September, October and November. But just kind of giving us an idea of when these things are going to happen. The next part of the PPR will be back for everyone, right? So that's kind of the end of the collaborative section. And this piece will just be telling us about client demographics, right? So we want to understand the number of duplicated clients that you all have served over this period of time. And so that means any existing clients from last quarter who are now being served in this quarter. That's kind of the first piece. And then the second piece is unique new clients. So these are folks who weren't served last quarter, but they're now being served this quarter. And we want to know how many of those clients you all are serving. Then we have kind of questions about race, right? So we want to know how many folks you're serving across different races. We want to know across gender, and then we want to know across different age categories. And you can see in race, age, and gender that there is an unknown. And so if you don't have that information, you're not collecting data on these demographics, that's totally fine too. You'll just enter that number in unknown for how many clients you all are serving. Or maybe you're able to get this demographic information for 50 or 80% or, some number of them. And so you can enter, I know 5 of them are in this category, 8 of them are in this category, but there's 4 of them that I'm not quite sure what category they fall into, and that's totally fine too. So we just kind of want to get an idea of what the demographics are that you all are serving. The next part of the PPR is going to be based on your priority area, right? And so we want to know, are you all doing civil legal aid, violence prevention, economic development, reentry, or youth development kind of services? And we want to kind of understand which ones you're doing. So this would just be checks. And we want to understand what kind of outreach you're doing in order to be able to get your clients. And so again, these are just kind of checks here. And we also would like you to rank the most commonly used form of outreach. So maybe you're putting up posters, physical posters, advertisements. That's kind of normally what you're doing. But you're also kind of using social media, and you're also kind of using community events. Then it would go 1, 2, 3. And you don't need to worry about, if you're not using phone calls, if you're not using instant or text message, then you don't need to rank those, just kind of making sure that you're tracking what you're using most often. And then we're also going to ask you questions about the client services that you all are providing based on priority area. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these, right? Because there's a lot of potential measures that we have in here based on kind of the list that we provided in the NOFO. But we do kind of want to understand what you all are doing in these areas. And so again, we want you to pick 3 or 4 of these metrics per kind of the categories that you're doing. So if you're doing civil legal aid, we want you to pick 3 or 4. If you're also doing youth development and reentry, pick 3 or 4 for each of those. And for here, you again only need to report on things that are relevant for you. And so if you are assisting clients with a civil legal aid issue, you can put the number in here. If you're not doing that, then you can leave it blank. If you are counting the number of clients who receive legal advice and whether they have a favorable outcome or an unfavorable outcome, you would put the numbers there. If not, again, just kind of leave it blank. And so, excuse me, for civil legal aid, we have general, we have consumer protection, family law and safety, income maintenance, housing, disability, education, and then we have other civil legal aid issues. For economic development, we kind of have divided these into categories of general, job skills and training, employment access, workforce development, neighborhood revitalization. Then for reentry, again, we have kind of a general category, workforce development, legal assistance, housing, education, supportive and financial services. For violence prevention, again, a general category, risk assessment, education and employment, housing, physical and behavioral health, legal assistance. And then for youth development, we have a general category, delinquency and safety, education and employment, and family. We also do have a section here for you all to be able to add your own specific kind of output measures that you all have put into your contract that might not be listed here, right? So if you have a metric that isn't listed here that you really have been focused on, it's one of the ones that's important to you, we do still want you to track that and we want you to put it here. And so if you have 3 or 4 that aren't listed up there at all, then you can kind of ignore that section and just jump here to really put what your unique objectives and outputs are going to be. And so we have outcomes and outputs in here. And then as Maureen kind of described before, we also have this narrative response section. And so we do want to kind of understand the description of success towards your objectives, right? Where have you all been doing really well in the past quarter, and what does that mean? And then if you've encountered any kind of barriers or setbacks that are really delaying your progress, explain kind of what that means and what that looks like to you. And again, this isn't something that's punitive, it's just something to help us gather information to really be able to understand where you all are at as an organization, what you've been able to accomplish, and then maybe some areas where, you just haven't been able to do exactly what you wanted to do, and that's totally fine. But just kind of helping us to understand how and why that's happening would be useful. And so this is really what the PPR looks like, right? It looks very long, but since you are, narrowing things down, you aren't going to need to fill out data in a million different categories. You all are going to pick the ones that are specific to your organization that you all are able to track and then put them into this form here. And so with that, I will open it up for any questions about the PPR form, about anything that we talked about today, or questions just in general.
Can I just make one clarifying point in that Excel sheet is really developed to help you gather the information. It is not the PPR, so you will not be sending that Excel sheet to your grant specialist. You'll be gathering the information on that Excel sheet and then using that to fill in the actual PPR, which is a survey instrument. And so when you have an executed agreement, you will receive an email that will have this Excel file, this tool to help you gather your information. It'll have the data dictionary, but it'll also have a link to the actual PPR survey instrument. And so you're going to be taking the information that you gather in this Excel sheet and dropping it into the PPR, as Lauren demonstrated last week. And when you submit that, then it goes into this, we have the ability to aggregate that data and to analyze it, but you'll also be sending a PDF of that PPR survey instrument. There's a button at the end that allows you to create that PDF, and it's the PDF of the survey instrument that you'll be emailing to your grant specialist and so that's their opportunity to take a look at the data that you're reporting for that quarter. Because all of the grant specialists don't have access to the back end of that survey instrument that we're using. It's our research partners, Jamie Lee and Lauren and the others, that actually have access to that survey tool and have the ability to analyze individual performance, as well as she said earlier, to aggregate and look across all of the programs. But the PDF of that PPR survey instrument is what you'll be emailing to your grant specialist every quarter, so we can so the specialists have access to this information. I don't see any questions in the chat. I hope that means that everybody understands all this information, but you do always have the opportunity, if you have any questions later on, to use the CJA.R3 training email address to send other questions to us as we go along. As I said, we plan on doing sort of quarterly refreshers as we go through this first period of performance. And of course, you'll all be working individually with grant specialists as well. So reach out to them if you have questions, and we'll help start this partnership. And I appreciate your partnerships, Jamie Lee, in helping us with the performance plan development. So let's see, here we have one question. If an organization is significantly behind on achieving performance measures, would it be best if they reach out to the R3 team in advance? Yeah, if you're really, for instance, if you're not able to hire the staff that you plan to hire to make your program happen, we certainly have seen that in some of our other programs where there is just really a lack of social workers that have trauma-informed training and are bilingual, things like that, very specific things, and you're not able to hire. Let us know. We don't have to wait till your quarterly report to kind of give us the heads up that something's happening. And that's why you probably heard me say about 16,000 times during this series that we really feel like we're your partners in this. So let your specialists know what's going on, and so that they can have an understanding and maybe they have a solution. So thanks for that question, Claire. Any other questions before we let you go? Let's see. Drop the links into the chat for the examples of the templates from the slides. We're going to send everybody an email. Everybody who's on my contact list will get the PDF of this PowerPoint that Jamie Lee used, as well as the recording of this session and kind of a summary of some of the key points. And everyone, when they have an executed agreement, will also get this Excel file that you demonstrated, the data dictionary, and that magic link to the survey tool, which will be your PPR. Well, it's too late to update our performance goals, measures, etc. If your agreement is already executed, yes, it is. But you'll be assigned to a grant specialist who will be your partner throughout the grant. So, have a conversation with them about it. And if it's, a minor adjustment, then we probably won't amend your agreement. If there's a major adjustment, we would have to do an amendment to your agreement. Just stay in close contact with your grant specialist so we can evaluate whether an amendment is needed. So let's see, okay, we should be good then. We haven't set anything in stone yet, right? If you don't have an executed agreement, it's not set in stone, right? So talk to the specialist that you're working with on the execution of your agreement. Great. Well, I'll thank you again, Jamie Lee. I really appreciate your help and your partnership with our RNA team. And thanks everyone for joining us on this long series, but we'll be back in touch when we have more training and updates for you. We appreciate all of your time.
Thanks, everyone.